with OKRaw.com to do another exciting episode for you. We got another episode with Dr. Tim Trader, who is a naturopathic doctor and has a PhD in nutrition. He started his raw vegan journey in 1990. I started in 1995. So we've both been doing it, 30 years and 35 years. And that being said, what I want to tell you guys is that, while we will agree on like 95% of the core beliefs that we have, that we totally agree upon, like, hey, eat organic food, grow your own food, it's better than store-bought stuff. Also, like, of course, our diet should be based around fruits and vegetables as the main source of our food. That being said, we do differ on about 5% of the stuff. So in this episode, we're going to share with you guys some of the things we differ on, and we're going to each basically share our opinions on the discussion topic, and then you're going to hear from the other person, right? So I want you guys to listen to this, and you guys, I don't know if I want you guys to necessarily pick sides, but we're here to basically educate you guys on how we both live and what we believe, and then we want to put this information out there for you so that you can decide on what you want to believe, right? And not to say that he's right and I'm wrong or anybody, but we both make some very valid points, and we both have our own ways of looking at things, especially, we both look at some of the science. So I guess with that, let's get right into this. And the first discussion topic that we're going to discuss today is something I do that Tim does not do, and that is cook foods. So Tim, what are your thoughts on cooked foods? Am I crazy for eating them?
I understand why you do what you do, because you're trying to maximize your nutrition and to get things into your body that you need, and because you test and you do all the work, this is what you have found that works best for you.
Exactly.
And I'm not going to dispute that at all. But I will talk about cooked food. Cooked food damages the nutrients. We'll start with protein. The protein under heat can denature. And there's two ways of denaturing. There's heat denaturing, which welds the amino acids together. And then there's denaturing of the stomach as digestion, which breaks the amino acids apart. Now, if you're already welded the amino acids together, the digestive juices don't necessarily break the bonds between the amino acids that would normally be there chemically instead of being physical. Now, this is controversial because the science stopped looking at this back in the 90s, the 1990s. So we really don't have any answer because for some reason it just stopped. Whether it's because the scientists don't believe it anymore, I've never seen any understandable replies to really what's going on here with this. Maybe they just don't want to look at it. But we find that there's very little about general nutrients that's affected by the heat. Okay, your fat soluble vitamins pretty much are okay with a little bit of heat, like something that John does. But we also see that things like vitamin C, which is a water-soluble vitamin, diminish. It diminishes to a certain extent, but still in some of these foods. So these things kind of make a difference in maximizing your nutrition. But like vitamin C, other antioxidants and vitamins can be reduced by cooking or heat applied, but heat also creates acrylamide and acrolein, but because of the way that John heats food, we don't see this. Number one, he's not doing a whole lot of fat that's creating the acroline, but because he's doing water heating, the acrylamide just kind of disappears. There's not there. It takes dry heat and a lot of it to create acrylamide. But the heat also creates something called aldehydes, and that becomes a real toxic situation, as well as AGEs, or
advanced glycation end products.
Yeah, that. Advanced glycation end products. And this can be a real situation. And these are some of the reasons why I choose not to do cooked foods. I find that most of the cooked foods are not as digestible for me. But of course, I don't know. I know that some of your cooked foods are starch-based.
Yep.
And I don't do very well because my body's not used to it. We make enzymes just to break down starches, whereas the fruit that I get doesn't take the enzymes to break down like it does a starch. And they say that the cooking helps break that down. Well, it does it to a certain extent, but I find personally that I don't do as well. So for that reason, I don't cook. I don't heat my products, and I do very well. I get my nutrient needs met abundantly. So there you go, John.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I respect Tim's position for sure, and that he does not heat process his food. And I definitely agree that toxins can be formed when cooking, and that I also agree that most cooked food that most people eat out there, when people think cooked food, it is bad, it is toxic, and it's quite addicting because it's highly processed food that is cooked. If it's, if it's baked, if it's broiled, if it's like fried, this stuff is incredibly toxic. You shouldn't eat it. And I'm not advocating for that kind of cooked food. Even if you go to a vegan restaurant, that stuff's so bad. Don't eat it. That's not the cooked food that I eat, right? Tim talked about some of the cooked food toxins. I'll actually have to look up the aldehydes. But the other ones, the AGEs and the acrylamides, right, with water cooking at low temperature, right? I don't get affected by these toxins that are created in normal cooking. Normal people cook like without the water and at high heat. I have videos where I discuss this in detail. Links down below to those if you guys want to know more. So I could also agree that vitamin C will be lowered, and some nutrients can be lowered in cooking. Some, if you're cooking in boiling water and you're boiling out the minerals, but also some nutrients can have greater uptake when being heat processed, such as chlorophyll. You ever notice when you lightly heat some broccoli, it turns bright green? That's because you're blowing open cell walls, and now certain nutrients, such as the chlorophyll, are exposed and come out and make the broccoli even more green. So if you're raw and you go to a salad bar and the broccoli looks really overly green, it's actually been blanched before, so you don't want to eat it. Right? These days, I'm not so particular about that. I also agree that cooking can denature proteins, but also there's studies that I see that say cooking can actually help us absorb more of the protein from the food. I agree that it also kills all the enzymes. I do take supplementary enzymes when I do eat the heat processed food. And I think the biggest thing for me is that the way I heat food keeps the water content in the food, which I'm sure Tim would also agree is very important. We don't want to eat dehydrated food or foods that have the water cooked out of it. And then the other thing I'll say is that the reason why I heat processed foods is because it allows me a greater diversity of foods that I wouldn't otherwise be able to eat raw. So most of the foods I eat, I'd say most, because more than 50% are foods that I wouldn't eat raw, like purple potatoes. Actually, I picked some up today. Things like rice, things like beans, especially kidney beans. Don't eat those raw, they can kill you.
Yes, please don't.
But you know, beans I now am able to heat process and eat and now expand the diversity. And for me personally, you know, reduce some of the fruit content because I found that wasn't working for me. I mean, fruit works great for Tim after all these years. But I found that I had to reduce the fruit a little bit and increase some of the heat processed foods. There's also heat processing foods allow me to eat more greens and eat them in a different format. So, you know, some of the things I've seen in some of the published studies is that depending on how you process the food, you're going to either, you know, gain better absorption of certain nutrients and lose some. There's no perfect method of like always eat food raw or always chew it or always blend it or always like steam it and then blend it or always, you know, steam it, because every different way you process food, you're going to lose some, you're going to gain some, and it's all different. So I can't tell you this is always the best. I'm going to say a mixture of all the ways we could process food to me is the best, and that's simply why I heat process food. Once again, these are small amounts. It does not make up the majority of my diet. I'm going to say anywhere from 10 to 20% of my calories in a day is from heat processed foods. And today I've been on a trip and I basically just brought all raw foods with me. So I haven't had anything heated. I did have some dehydrated kale chips that I made at home though. So yeah, that's my opinion on heat processed food. You know, I think it can be used properly. I think in most of the world, cooked foods are used improperly. But I think if you navigate it carefully and still eat mostly raw, you could be quite healthy and maybe even healthier than all raw, because now you're definitely going to get more different types of fibers in you, especially things like resistant starch, in heat processed and cooled foods than you otherwise could raw. All right, so the next controversial topic that we're going to discuss today is juicing. Tim does not believe in juicing, he does not do juicing, and I juice some of the food that I eat. Of course, juicing is raw, so I'm not heat processing it. I don't do steam juicing, I don't advocate for steam juicing, although I have pasteurized juices I have made so then I could actually ferment it, which is another controversial topic we'll discuss in a little bit. So yeah, juicing. My thoughts on juicing, once again, are first, I don't recommend juicing fruits. Some of the published studies are clear on that. You know, juicing fruits definitely are not a good thing, especially in the quantities that I see some raw vegans juicing fruits. Yeah, because they're just like living on fruit juice, and I won't say that's like sugar water, but it is removing an essential part of the fruit. And here's the thing that I think. Fruits are so easy. The fibers are soft, they have a really good texture. They're just so easy to eat and digest in their raw, whole, natural state. Why would you even juice them when we don't have to, okay? I know some people want to like blend fruits, which then you're literally disturbing the fiber matrix, but you're still keeping all the fiber, which I think is, if you want to, you know, make some kind of blended fruit thing, I think that's great. I do that myself. But what I'm talking about here is I'm talking about juicing vegetables, right? Tim talked about it a little bit earlier, right? Some people don't digest kale well, and if you cook kale, it can make it more digestible because people can't handle raw kale, especially if they buy it from the store and it's kind of old and getting nasty. But if you juice that nasty raw kale that you can't digest because it's too fibrous, right? It's basically like pre-digested for you. So, you know, one of my favorite things to do is I drink like 1 quart, which is approximately 4 pounds of juiced greens and other vegetables. Usually things like cucumbers. I don't generally do any fruits in my green juice. It's generally romaine based with collard greens, with ashwagandha stalks, which is like a celery, a more nutritious celery. It's in the same family. But generally I do all green juices myself because that allows me to up my greens, up my protein, up my water content from the vegetables instead of just drinking like filtered water, and of course get all the nutrients from my vegetables in an easy to digest format. I mean, and the other thing I say is that I have seen studies that if you drink carrot juice versus eat the carrots, you're going to have higher levels of beta carotene in your blood more quickly than just eating them alone. I also recommend, of course, slow juicing, or even better than slow juicing is vacuum juicing, so you do the least oxidative damage possible to the juices. And the last thing I'll say is that I do not advocate for juice fasting for long periods of time. How I use juice is as a, what I would call, supplement to my already healthy diet, right? I don't think juicing should take the place of eating healthily, eating fruits and vegetables you have to chew on, right? Or blended things. but I think you could add to your diet to dial it in even further and concentrate some of the nutrients that are not found in produce anymore, because nutrient levels in produce have been going down since industrial farming came along.
When you juice, one of the things you take away is fiber.
Some of the fiber.
Some of the fiber, I agree.
You keep the side, but you lose the inside.
And you lose some of everything. A lot of times the proteins, I'm going to back up. It also depends on how you're juicing. If you're doing a centrifuge juice, you find that you're getting less fiber than if you're doing some of the other kinds of juicing. But when you lose fiber, a lot of the protein sticks to the fiber. So you're losing protein. And when you're losing protein, some of the nutrients go out and you're not getting them. I've used this before. It takes about 8 oranges, and I agree with John that you don't want to be juicing fruit. But when I'm taking this as an example. When you juice 8 oranges, you get about a cup of orange juice. I'm talking Valencia oranges. Those 8 oranges have so much more protein, so much more of the nutrients and the fiber. And because we live in a society that doesn't even get the recommended daily amounts of fiber, to do that, taking away the fiber, doesn't really help us. Juice, especially fruit juice, I'm not especially, but fruit juice in period, goes in and is absorbed straight through the stomach. It's not going into the intestines to be absorbed, but it's straight into, and the same as sugary juices. It's gone right in, and it bypasses the ability for the body to realize that it's got more calories. This makes a problem for the body. Now, John's green juices, I think, probably do get absorbed through the stomach a lot better than they would if they were whole, for sure. But you're not adding that much more calorie. You're adding more nutrients and you're adding more water, more hydration. Okay, I kind of go for that. But juicing itself takes away a lot of the nutrients that I try to get in with eating a whole food. So we're basically talking about a processing. I try to keep everything from the minimum of processing at all. And this is what works again and again. We don't see animals in the wild juicing. The anthropoid apes that are frugivores, they eat the whole fruit and they eat some greens as well. Now, not some greens, a good amount of greens as well. So we do pretty good just by eating the whole fruit. This is what we were meant to do. As far as eating green drinks, if you have irritable bowel syndrome or inflammatory bowel disease, sometimes these people start to bleed, especially with Crohn's and colitis. And I will recommend at that time some green juices because they need the nutrients so badly. But they can't take the fiber because it just literally will rip off any scabbing, I'm going to call it scabbing, the body trying to hold and heal the lacerations that are in the bowel. So there are times that we do use these things. And like John, I see that going long time juice diets, he calls them juice fasts, I call them juice diets. Because to fast means that you're doing without. But you're getting a lot of nutrients, and a lot of people keep going with this for too long because they lose weight. But again and again, the science shows that if you try to do this for losing weight, because you're not teaching yourself a better way of eating, then we end up gaining the weight back that we lost. And usually more than what we lost. This does not work. So long-term juice diets are not really healthy. But I find that it's better to get the whole greens in. And yeah, sometimes cooking can help when it's hard for us to digest, but you find out that if you give it a little bit of time and you slowly add these foods in, you find that the body is able to start making the enzymes when it's been not used to making these enzymes, and can actually create the need for more enzymes. And it's like you don't want to go out and work out like you were Arnold Schwarzenegger right away. You won't be able to do it. And it's the same thing. Your body's learning something new, and it needs to adjust and get rid of and get used to things. And in doing so, you do so much better in the long run. You're able to produce the enzymes that you had been unable to before. So I still like my whole foods, but I do understand what John's doing and how it's working for him, and I go for that because we are all individuals, and what I see in my testing and in my documenting of what I eat is working. John sees what he's doing as working because he's doing the same thing. He's testing, he's finding out, he's making sure what's happening is right and not just what he believes or what he's been told. So it's a good thing.
All right, Dr. Tim, another controversial topic, something that I do and I know you actually don't do, is beans. So beans, whether they are cooked or sprouted, which some beans can be sprouted, you get to go first, then I'll reply.
Okay. I don't like beans, and they don't like me. So I've tried sprouting. I haven't been real good about eating beans any other time. And we've talked about, don't eat raw kidney beans. Please do not. And pretty much the rest of the beans is not really something that you really want to go for. Uncooked. If you're going to eat them, either sprout them or cook them. And when you're sprouting, you're not going to get it from the bulk bins at the health food store. You got to go get sprouting seeds to do it. But legumes have a protein called prolamins. And prolamins have been shown, I don't care in what form, they've all been shown, because gluten is a prolamin. And we know that gluten, even for those who do not have celiac disease, can cause intestinal permeability, or what some people call leaky gut. I like intestinal permeability because it tells you that things are going through a body part. So I prefer that. But we find that prolamins increase zonulin. And zonulin opens up the gaps in your intestinal wall. And that when those gaps open, things get through like whole proteins instead of broken down amino acids. And they get in and they cause havoc. And the immune function goes after that and attacks them, breaks them down, and gets them ready to be excreted. When we have more leaks or intestinal permeability, and the body keeps attacking some of these things, they also see something called there's something in another part of the body that looks like the same proteins called molecular mimicry. And it goes after that. So we have people who are not celiac, don't have celiac disease, but they still have problems with gluten. This is gluten sensitivity. Well, these same situations come with legumes. And then there is my hated topic of lectins, which, heated, the lectins are reduced severely. Not always removed, but severely brought down. But the lectins in themselves can cause problems. And I don't like using lectins as a showboat, because most fruit and vegetables have some kind of lectin. Some fruits and vegetables have lectins that benefit us, some that don't. And I see that legumes generally don't have good lectins to them. And so it's just something to be very cautious about. Another thing is that legumes, because of their causing intestinal permeability, have a higher rate of people being allergic to them. And that tells me that maybe this is something that at least people need to back off of for a while. If not, everything you can get from a legume, you can get pretty much from other plant sources like leafy greens. So I don't see a need for them, and I do see some problematics about it.
All right, I mean, that was an excellent answer. I mean, I can't address all those issues, but what I'll say is just from my point of view. And so I guess the first thing I'll say is that there's traditional cultures around the world that have been eating beans as one of their staple foods for thousands of years, right? And maybe some cultures also ate fruits as their staple food, but some cultures, maybe didn't have fruits all year, but you could store beans and cook them and eat them. So I'll say that. Number two is there are a lot of studies showing that beans are associated with longevity. Also, some of the blue zones eat beans. I think another thing that's very important for me is there are certain beans that can be sprouted and eaten. So I'm going to declare those right now. Once again, sprouting seeds is what I recommend, not bulk seeds. Lentils, adzuki, mung, and chickpeas are generally thought of as safe to sprout and eat raw if you want to keep your raw label. That being said, of all those, I found that the chickpeas really didn't digest for me because I'd try to make like raw chickpea hummus and it never digested well. But now I eat like heat processed chickpeas blended in hummus and I'm fine. I will also say that I definitely respect Tim's opinions, and there's definitely toxins in beans. That's why I pressure cook them, and based on my research, pressure cooking is the best way to reduce most of those toxins to the minimal amounts. that being said, I also will respect Tim and say that, you know, I don't appear to be allergic to beans or have any ill effects from beans, although everybody may have different sensitivities. Like if he eats one bean, he may break out, or I don't know what's going to happen, or who knows. And so I'll say everybody needs to find out what works for them. You know, but I mean, I like to think also success leaves clues in a lot of people, and also depending on your specific background and heritage, right? If you're from a culture that traditionally ate a lot of beans, then, you know, genetics play a small part. I wouldn't say large part, but do play a part in how we can handle our foods. Plus, of course, our microbiomes can play a factor as well. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I started eating beans, because there are some unique prebiotic fibers in beans. I think I'm thinking of like GOS, that are not found in other plant foods that are raw. So I'm like, okay, I could buy this supplement in a white powder that's probably extracted from beans, or I could eat beans. So what are my choices? A supplement that's in white powder, or if I just eat beans, plus all the other nutrients.
There you go.
So I would say that, you know, this is why I eat beans, plus also I was needing to reduce my fruit content because I found a higher fruit diet wasn't doing for me. So I need to get my calories from somewhere else. And that I figured that beans, as well as other whole plant foods that I could now heat process, you're going to be better for me personally. And so that's why I eat beans. Of course, some beans, such as the lupini beans, have actually very high protein, more than even soybeans. So if you're trying to do, and it has less carbohydrate than soybeans. So if you're trying to do a high protein, once again, lower fat, and higher protein, so the lupini beans actually have higher protein than even cashews, and what was the other one?
Not so much.
Yeah, well, yeah, not much, but nonetheless, it's higher than cashews, which people think, oh, it has a lot of protein in it, but also, of course, cashews have a lot more fat. But nonetheless, you know, so, and then I also, you know, diversify my beans. I don't just always eat one type of bean, I just, whatever kind of bean, and there's so many kinds of beans out there. It's insane. So, I mean, that's why I eat beans, and, you know, beans make up a very small portion of my food. So, for example, last night I made a salad, 9 quarts of salad in a big bowl, mostly greens from my garden, 6 different kinds of lettuces, and I basically put 2 organic box beans from Whole Foods, which is, I don't even know, what is it, 15 ounces per box, into the 9 quarts of salad and other things. And so, like, when I eat the salad, I might get, you know, a few pieces of bean in there. I don't recommend bean-based diets. I'm against bean-based diets because we should have a fruit and vegetable-based diet. Most of it should be raw, and I think adding a little beans in some cases can improve your raw vegan diet. Maybe in some cases it may be detrimental, but you need to find that out for yourself. All right, next controversial topic is something that I indulge in, and once again, Tim does not, and that is fermented foods. So I'm going to go first and share my thoughts on fermented foods. So, you know, for a long time, like when I got into raw, I started eating fermented foods, thought it was good because like Ann Wigmore Lifestyle recommends fermented foods, and then I got more into hygiene, then I like shun fermented foods and they're bad, they're terrible, they're rotten, you don't eat rotten food. And then nowadays actually seeing some of the new emerging research regarding microbiome and fermented foods and how that could positively impact and modulate your microbiome, including reduced inflammation, potentially increase diversity of your microbiome. I started including more fermented foods. I've never had an issue personally eating fermented foods and having anything weird or digestive issues or anything happening to me personally. I've actually seeked out some of the best fermented foods out there so that I can include them in my diet, because microbiome experts say to include as many fermented foods as possible. However, I will say that there are some fermented foods out there that are quite toxic and you should avoid, such as like, you know, kimchis and sauerkraut with high salt content, which are actually most all of them, because they are made with salt. So, you know, they think it's to prevent bad bacteria growth. That being said, I interviewed Sandor Katz, links down below my gardening channel, who's wrote the Fermentation Bible. And of course, we can ferment without salt, but people like the texture that the salt creates because it kind of keeps things a bit more crunchy, and also people love salt and are addicted to salt, which is not a health food. And I'm sure Tim will mention that in Asia, people that eat fermented foods show higher, you know, cancer rates in their colon. And I would agree with that. And I'd say, yeah, you want to nix the salt in fermented foods. I will also say that I visited the Kimchi Museum in Korea when I visited there, and basically they put kimchi in ceramic vats in the ground because they didn't have refrigerators so that they could eat in the wintertime. So it could modulate the temperature. Now they have kimchi fridges that they could plug in instead of storing them in the ground. So I mean, this was like basically a feast or famine food in the olden days that got people to preserve their harvest and eat it. But of course now there's emerging science showing that it can be beneficial. So that's one fermented food I think is quite bad, is things like added salt, fermented foods, which are most of the ones you buy at the health food store. Second one I'd say that is actually quite bad is all the kombucha that you buy at the health food store, because they're adding sugar in and it's not fully digested. There's still too much processed sugar in the kombucha, and you're probably still addicted to sugar if you're buying kombucha at the store. I've made my own kombucha and I let it ferment so much that it almost tastes like vinegar, which then I'd say it's more healthy. And so, for me, fermented foods are not necessarily about getting the bacteria in me that are in the fermented food. While, these are maybe transient bacteria and can go through us and give us some benefit while it's moving through us, they're most of the time not going to colonize or stay within us. Right. So like if you take antibiotics to eat fermented food and think that bacteria in that fermented food is going to lodge in you and now stay around, that's not true. I would say that we want to eat whole plant foods with the fiber source and resistant starches and other properties, even such as polyphenols, that'll actually feed our microbiome and bring it back to life, not just take a fermented food to think it's going to take the place of, when you wipe everybody out because you did take an antibiotic because of actual need, not just for preventative measures, all right? And so I think that the main benefit of fermented foods in my eyes is actually the bacteria basically break down and make more bioavailable some of the food that you're now ingesting. So if I make my own fermented cabbage, sauerkraut, the bacteria are basically breaking down the sauerkraut, creating lactic acid, creating different organic acids and making it more easy for us to digest. In addition, the bacteria that's causing the fermentation is putting out metabolites. So for example, in the case of the tempeh I eat, the raw tempeh, not the pasteurized tempeh that you buy at the health food store because that's been pasteurized, been heat processed, but the raw tempeh can have B12 in there. Or if I eat natto, which is basically fermented soybeans, that can have nattokinase, which is a very powerful raw enzyme that people could buy in a little supplement tablet. Nattokinase that dissolve their blood clots in their arteries and stuff. Not to mention also that natto, when fermented, also provides vitamin K2, which Tim may say that we could potentially make ourselves, so we don't need to supplement it. But I like to be rather safe than sorry. So there's for me, fermented foods are a functional food. Also, they add some nice umami flavor. I like to eat miso, the low sodium miso, of course, natto, tempeh, the sauerkrauts. I make my own fermented fruit juice with the Fermented boulardii, which is a beneficial yeast. Link down below to that video. But yeah, so I'd say fermented foods to me are of benefit. But once again, my diet is not based around fermented foods. It's fruits and vegetables with fermented foods as added flavor and specific function.
Stomach cancer in the Orient is going crazy, and it's been there for a very long time, hundreds of years, literally, and it's because of the salt. And but what John said is that this is how they preserve their food, so they didn't run out. But I don't see it as a need today or as a health food. Our stomach our stomach is here to keep us safe. It takes out bacteria, viruses, and other microbes that could make us sick. And that's why a lot of our immune function is centered around the digestive system. Because in case something gets through the stomach, it's there to take care of things before it gets spread throughout our body. So, fermented foods, the bacteria is actually destroyed. what they say, they call it transient bacteria because it doesn't colonize. Well, that's because it's dead, because our system killed it off. There is metabolites that do come with the fermenting of vegetables and some fruit. But what we see is those metabolites do make it through. You talked about one, lactic acid. And that lactic acid keeps the opportunity of bacteria in our gut from growing too much. Whereas if we actually replaced and gave the bacteria in our gut the proper food for it to eat, the lactic acid bacteria that made the lactic acid to start with will start to flourish by itself and be there. We find that, number one, if you take a look at regular vegetables, even if you wash them, it still has some bacteria on it. And that bacteria is going to get through if the fermented bacteria would get through. But I really see that this is destroyed. And what we're doing is we're relying on the byproducts of the fermented foods to keep things in order. Because as soon as you stop, people always say, oh, fermented food, it helps my digestion. Yeah, it helps your digestion because it keeps the environment in a proper place. But if you actually gave the nutrients that the bacteria need, you'd see things grow. And that's what works. Now, fermented food, okay, John has taken out the idea of salt, but what about vinegar? You even admitted that.
Yeah, I eat vinegar too.
Yeah, and I see a problem with vinegar. Acetic acid is the base of vinegar, and that is inflammatory. It is known as a poison, and it just doesn't seem to be something that I want to be part of in my body. So I find lots of problems with the so-called benefits of vinegar. And it actually is a waste product, and we find that nothing can survive in its own waste product. So there's a problem there, and if we're adding vinegar into our system, it can cause things from ulcers all the way down to problems with the intestinal lining. It actually can dissolve the mucus of our intestinal lining. So I just don't find it something necessary or something that creates health. So we don't need to do anything special to our foods. We just need to eat them in the way that we're supposed to, in a raw, whole form. And so this is my point on fermented foods.
All right. The next thing we're going to discuss, Tim, is supplements, and you get to go first.
Okay. I've said many times, I'm not against supplements. I'm against stupid supplementing. It's what we need sometimes to get us through a problem. But most times, like the studies have shown, is that multivitamins, especially synthetic multivitamins and minerals, don't do the job and actually create ill health instead of beneficial health. Sure, if you're eating a really bad diet, a junk food diet, people say, oh, I feel better for it. Yeah, because they're actually stimulating. And so this is not something good, it's just stimulating. But for the most part, we find that it does not bring, the studies show, it does not bring health, it does not see benefits. Mostly what it is putting money in somebody else's pocket. And we don't need to do that. But there are times that we do need supplements. And like I take B12 because I'm not getting B12 from my diet, and so I take some B12. But for the most part, there's a lot of supplements out there that give a lot of promises that don't come through. A lot of supplements even have been shown to not even have the product that they say they do. And some other supplements actually have put in some pharmaceutical drugs in their combination to see that you feel better. And it's not replacing a nutrient that you actually need. And so when testing and you come up with something that you are needed and you can't find it with your food, because getting your nutrients from your food always works better. Whatever it is, the food gives you a multiple amount of different nutrients that work together synergistically, that help us to function. But when you isolate it, it doesn't always do that. Sometimes you kind of need to do that. But it's not a rare case, and you have to find out for sure that you're doing it by testing. That you need it, the only way to really find out is testing. And that's what really works. So, what's your thought?
All right, Tim. Yeah, so I mean, I definitely share some of your thoughts on supplements for sure. You know, number one of the things that you said that I will reiterate, because I also believe this. Number one, our goal should not be to take a supplement. Our goal should be get to all our nutrients from the food. I go so far as to grow my own food in mineral-rich soil with bacteria and all these other things, and a wide diversity of food, right? So I could get the nutrients from my food. I also, of course, eat a very diverse diet, more diverse than you, Tim, because I eat processed food. So I'm able to eat more foods, right? Which some people may say, it's better to eat simple. You know, my idea is that I'm basically, it's like I'm betting on the roulette table. And if I like put all my chips on every single number, I'm gonna win. And it's like I'm eating every different single food. I'm gonna get all the nutrients I need without having to micromanage this and that, right? And then I'm less likely to need a supplement, okay? I'll also agree with Tim on that. I mean, the best way to know if you're deficient and you need a supplement is to get tested. You know, I've gotten many tests over the years which showed my B12 has always been traditionally low, my homocysteine has been, and my methylmalonic acid has been a little bit high, but not over concerning. But every time I see that, I'm like, I start to supplement, and I supplement irregularly. These days I'm a little bit more proactive about it and take a bit more B12. I will also take vitamin D in the off season when I'm not getting enough sun, because my test showed me that I was low in vitamin D. I'm probably more agreeable to maybe supplements than Tim would be. That being said, even some foods these days, of course, due to strip mining agriculture these days, foods can be deficient in certain nutrients. Potentially selenium if you're not getting Brazil nuts from Brazil, not from other countries that may not have the selenium in the soil where the Brazil nut tree is grown. Right? Maybe zinc if you're not eating enough nuts and seeds in proper amounts, or getting, you know, revitalized vegetables grown in mineral-rich soil with zinc in it, and the plants aren't absorbing the zinc, you may become zinc deficient. So I think that, you know, there's supplements such as the Complement supplement, link down below to that video where I discuss that in further detail, that has some of the common nutrients that can be deficient in a vegan diet, especially if you're just haphazardly eating, I think can be beneficial. I also take a DHA supplement derived from algae just to ensure my health. I mean, Tim might would probably disagree and say, hey, we could make our own, which that is true, but the question I would have is, do we make enough? And should I rely on my body to make it properly if I'm getting enough omega-3 to 6s, which is a whole nother discussion in a whole nother video, which I have a really good video on that topic with Dr. Rick Dina, link down below to that. But I personally take a algae-based DHA supplement to ensure that I'm not going to be deficient. I mean, my dad does have Alzheimer's, and DHA, has, according to some vegan doctors out there, have been shown to be high in raw vegans, and they have memory challenges later in life, and that's not somewhere where I want to go. So maybe call it cheap insurance, and maybe it's not going to do anything. And then I also do take an enzyme supplement. Of course, I do eat some heat processed food, so I take an enzyme supplement that I believe will help me digest, my heat processed foods better, because of course in heat processed foods there's no enzymes left. And then of course I also take a few other supplements. I take a probiotic supplement. My favorite probiotic supplement is actually just a fermented food in a capsule, but I have also taken probiotics. I also take prebiotic fiber supplement as well. So there's a bunch of things I take. So of course my goal is to get my nutrients from my food and everything I need. But of course, I think that in some cases taking specific nutrients in higher quantities than food can provide in specific situations. For example, during allergy season, I take a quercetin that has been shown to maybe help with allergies. It's not something I take regularly, but I think that can be beneficial. So, I'm not like super hardcore on supplements, but I also agree that, like Tim said, most supplements you buy are a scam. I mean, I'll say that. I've seen so much testing. I go to the trade show of the supplement industry every year, and I see all the supplements, and a lot of it's just crap. A lot of it's made in China, and especially don't buy your supplements on Amazon. It's the worst thing. You're gonna get fleeced, and you're probably getting something that's not even what they're saying on the label is even in there, right? So stick with good, solid brands. I like the Now brand. They actually do testing, or the Life Extension brand are two brands that I would recommend if you guys need to get a brand. And there are, of course, others out there. I haven't researched them all, but yeah, the worst places to buy it on Amazon, because people just label whatever, and Amazon does zero testing. Or I'd say go visit a local health food store and talk to the people there. So definitely think there's a lot of scams in supplements. You need to be very careful, and you need to select your supplements carefully. And of course, the best way to know is to get tested. So yeah, so I think that's the end of this episode where we talk about our controversies. And what you're probably thinking is, man, John's a bit more open to these things, and Tim's more, like, I would say hardcore, like, just like more like just like old school teaching, right? But then he's modified his approach to meet what he's learned at the beginning,
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't see myself as hardcore, but
I see you as hardcore because you're like basically no supplements, only as needed, and like cooking's bad and no juicing, and
okay.
To me that's hardcore, man. Like I want to make it easier on my life and not as hardcore, but to each their own. We're still friends, and here's the thing, I want to give you guys a wide variety of views. I mean, once again, Tim and I agree on mostly everything, but I know some of you guys may not believe in me and what I teach or preach. And if your beliefs jive more with Tim, right, then at least I want you guys to get on track and listen to him fully, and even get help by him, because he can do nutritional testing to ensure you don't need any supplements, to make sure you don't go deficient. Because I want you guys to watch the video I did with Tim, link down below to that interview. It's a long format video where you guys can get to know Tim better and learn about his actually B12 deficiency, because he believed that we could make our own, and he learned the hard way through the school of hard knocks that was not true. So now he's opened up a little bit on supplementation, to get tested to see if you are deficient, then get something. Whereas I might be a little more non-cautious and just like, okay, I'm going to supplement just to hedge my bets, okay? So each of us need to determine where we're at. But Tim, if somebody wants to reach out to you to like find out, to get tested and learn more from you about what you're doing and what you're teaching out there, which I would consider, once again, more hardcore and more old school, whereas I'm kind of going more of the new school and off the rails route, how would somebody do that?
Okay, first I want to say something about the hardcore. When I work with people, I work with where you're at. I do not force you to do anything. I want to be your partner in working with you. So if you find that something is working for you, like John talks about his complement. Is it complement?
Yeah, complement supplement, yeah.
Supplement? Okay. Personally, complement supplement is trying to be an insurance company to tell you that you might be, according to several studies, deficient if you are vegan. Where I see there might be something that you are deficient in, but something you may be taking in loads of already. Let's say you're deficient in zinc, but you also love putting seaweed in your salad. Now you may be getting too much iodine and causing problems. That's why if you're going to do this individually. I also see we live in a society that believes more is better.
It's not always better. We want the perfect amount. Not too much, not too little, but the perfect amount.
But because of that, we find that too much DHA can thin the blood.
Yep.
And this may not be where you want to go. So the idea is to
Appropriate amount.
to find the appropriate amount.
Get tested to know.
To test and to see where you can go and what you really need to do. If you are spending extra money on something that you don't need, it's okay, so it's $80 a bottle. What's the big deal? $80 over 5 years becomes a whole lot more money that you could have spent somewhere else. So yeah, I do find that this is a situation that needs to be fine-tuned. And do I sometimes recommend people having a DHA EPA supplement? I may even recommend the very same supplement that you take, okay? Because they are not converting. And so that's fine. Another thing I want to add, you talked about, yes, some cooked foods are very addictive, is what I see. When you have high salt, high carbohydrate, and high fat.
Yep, agreed.
Those three items are purposely put into some of the not only the processed foods, but in foods that you would buy commercially, like in restaurants, specifically tailored to see that you are addicted to it. They cause addiction. They release a dopamine situation in the brain that asks for more and more and more to get the same dopamine high. So we really do have some of the same thoughts on some of these things. And I'm actually not so hardcore. I'm willing.
You don't even eat cooked. You don't eat beans. You don't juice.
You're right, I don't.
That to me is hardcore, man.
But you know what? That doesn't mean that I'm going to limit you
Right.
from doing that.
Because you're open. If the person's at that place and that's what they need, you're open to that.
I'm
for
going
you
to encourage
personally,
it
yeah,
because this is what's going to work for them.
exactly. Everybody's different, so that's what Tim realizes, is that everybody's at a different place, may need different things.
So this is where we come together.
Right. Yeah, we both agree with that.
I don't sit here and judge John for what he does.
Yeah, I respect him for what he does, actually.
And it works for both of us. So let's find a place that works for you.
Exactly. And if you want to stay more legit and not do all the crazy things I do, and you want to get help, I'd say that's why you should go to Tim, because he lives this himself. Of course, if you're not there, you could go to him also, because he's open to the best ways of processing food to get tested to make sure you're not nutrient deficient.
I'm willing to work with you.
Right.
And I'm not here to dictate to you what you should be doing. And if I do make a suggestion and you say I can't do that, then let's find another way.
Yep.
So my website's recoverhealth.info. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and a lot more in the future, I hope.
All right, great. I'll put the links down below, Tim, so everybody can get a hold of you if they want your help.
Thank you.
The final question I have for you, Tim, today, is there any final words of wisdom you'd like to share with my audience before we sign off?
Okay. Yeah. We can find our own health individually.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is find out what our body is saying.
Yeah.
What is going on in our body as well. A lot of times we've forgotten to listen to our body to a point where we don't recognize what it's saying. That's what testing is for. And testing can be more specific. But you need to rely on the body wisdom as well. And that's what's going to bring you health, not your head. Because you'll fall for just about any scam out there. I know I could.
Yeah.
Until we go deep and find out, is this real and is it working? And so this is what we need to do. Each one of us, if we really want health. And I don't know anyone who doesn't want health. Benjamin Franklin was reported as saying, if you don't have health, you don't have anything. So let's all get healthy and make this world a better place.
Definitely agree with that. I mean, health is your best wealth, and invest in your health. You know, you are worth it. So with that, I think that's going to be the close of this episode. If you guys like this raw vegan controversy video, want more videos like this, please be sure to give this video a big thumbs up. Also be sure to share this with other people out there in the raw vegan space that are more hardcore, that are more agree with Tim, or maybe people that are open to making some adjustments and hearing my views on things and how I've had to shift my personal diet to include some of the things that I do that I explained in this episode. I think this is a valuable episode for many people that can enlighten them and hear literally both sides of the story, because I know a lot of YouTube channels may just prevent their side, where I'm open to sharing, especially people that I respect highly, like Dr. Tim, who's been doing this longer than me, his views on it as well, because obviously what he's doing is working for him, and he's dialed in his diet a lot over the many years as well. Also, be sure to click that subscribe button right down below so you don't miss my new and upcoming episodes. I've come here 5 to 7 days here in our show, where you'll be learning what new knowledge I'll be sharing with you guys. I wouldn't want you to miss any single episode, so make sure you click the little bell so you get notified as many videos come out. And finally, be sure to check out past episodes. The past episodes are a wealth of knowledge. Over 700 episodes at this time on this channel dedicated to you guys all about eating more fresh fruits and vegetables and other plant foods in the best ways possible. And I'll put a link down below to the video I did with Dr. Tim about getting up close and personal with him, with like a super long, over 1 hour long interview where we go deep so you could learn more about his lifestyle and philosophies and his teachings so you could learn more. So with that, my name is John Kohler with OKRaw.com. We'll see you next time, and until then, remember, keeping your fresh fruits and vegetables, they're always best.